Well, Jim Jensen has been a member of our club for a long time, and I've heard him give all different kinds of speeches. And I'm really excited today to hear Jim give his presentation. He's in the specialty speech manual number 4, and it's read out loud. And the title of his speech is The Count and the Wedding Guest. And I'm going to give you a little introduction to his speech. O. Henry is one of America's most famous authors and is noted for his short stories. The first collection of his short stories were published in 1907. His stories are often set in New York City in an era we might not recognize today. There's no telephone, no electricity, no automobile, and a woman who does not have the vote. All these things are to take place shortly after O. Henry's stories are written. America has gone from a rural nation to an urban nation, and his stories often reflect what it's like to be young and aspiring to be middle class in New York City at the dawn of the 20th century. So, prepare yourselves to take back in time and find out how young love worked at the turn of the century. Let's give a warm welcome for Jim Jensen.
O. Henry is one of my favorite authors. And in this story, the feeling created by someone wanting or desiring you is a great elixir to love, even if that feeling is created under false pretenses. In this short story, O. Henry shows how love can blossom even under false pretenses of great loss, but how those false pretenses can create an interesting twist to the story of love. The Count and the Wedding Guest. One evening, when Andy Donovan went to dinner at his 2nd Street boarding house, Mrs. Scott introduced him to a new boarder, a young lady, Miss Conway. Miss Conway was small and unobtrusive. She wore a plain, snuffy brown dress and bestowed her interests, which seemed languid, upon her plate. She lifted her diffident eyelids and shot one perspicuous, judicial glance at Mr. Donovan, politely murmured his name, and returned to her mutton. Mr. Donovan bowed with the grace and beaming smile that were rapidly winning for him social, business, and political advancement, and erased the snuffy brown one from the tablets of his consideration. 2 weeks later, Andy was sitting on the front steps enjoying his cigar. There was a soft rustle behind him and above him, and Andy turned his head. And his head turned. Just coming out of the door was Miss Conway. She wore a night black dress of crepe de, oh, this thin, fine black material. Her hat was black, and from it drooped and fluttered an ebon veil, filmy as a spider's web. She stood on the top step and drew on black silk gloves, not a speck of white or a spot of color about her dress anywhere. Her rich golden hair was drawn with scarcely a ripple, into a shining smooth knot low on her neck. Her face was plain rather than pretty, but it was now illuminated and made almost beautiful by her large gray eyes that gazed about the houses across the street into the sky with the expression of the most appealing sadness and melancholy. Gather the idea, girls. All black. You know, with the preference for crepey sheen. That's it. All black, and that sad, faraway look. And the hair shining under the black veil. And try to look as although your young life has been blighted, just as it was about to hop, skip, and jump over the threshold of life. A walk in the park might do you good. And be sure to happen at the door at just the right moment. And all the guys pay attention to you. But it's fierce now how cynical I am, ain't it, to talk about morning costumes that way. Mr. Donovan suddenly reinscribed Miss Conway upon the tablets of his consideration. He threw away the remaining inch and a quarter of his cigar that would have been good for another 8 minutes, and quickly shifted the center of his gravity to his low-cut patent leathers. "It's a fine evening, Miss Conway," he said, and if the Weather Bureau could have heard the confidence emphasized in his tones, it would have hoisted the square white signal and nailed it to the mast. "To them that has the heart to enjoy it, it is, Mr. Donovan," said Miss Conway with a sigh. Mr. Donovan in his heart cursed fair weather, heartless weather. It should hail and blow and snow to be consonant with the mood of Miss Conway. "I hope none of your relatives, I hope you haven't sustained a loss," ventured Mr. Donovan. "Death has claimed," said Miss Donovan. I'm sorry, Miss Conway, hesitating. "Not a relative, but one who, but I will not intrude my grief upon you, Mr. Donovan." "Intrude," protested Mr. Donovan. "Why, say, Miss Conway, I'd be delighted. I'd be sorry. Sure, nobody could sympathize with you truer than I would." Miss Conway smiled a little smile, and it was sadder than her expression in repose. "Laugh, and the world laughs with you. Weep, and they give you a laugh," she quoted. I have learned that, Mr. Donovan. I have no friends or acquaintances in this city, but you have been kind to me. I appreciate it highly." He had passed her the salt pepper at the table twice in the boarding house. "It's tough to be alone in New York, that's a cinch," said Mr. Donovan. "But say, whenever this little old town does loosen up and get friendly, it goes the limit. Say, would you like to take a little stroll in the park, Miss Conway? Don't you think it might chase away some of your mullygrubs? And if you'd allow me..." "Thanks, Mr. Donovan. I'd be pleased to accept of your escort if you think the company of one whose heart is filled with gloom would be any ways agreeable to you." Through the open gates of the iron-railed old downtown park, where the elect once took the air, they strolled and found a quiet bench. There is this difference between the grief of youth and of old age. Youth's burden is lightened by as much of it as another shares. Old age may give and give, but the sorrow remains the same. "He was my fiancé," confided Miss Conway at the end of an hour. "We were going to be married next spring. I don't know what you think. I don't want you to think that I'm stringing you on, Mr. Donovan, but he was a real count. He had an estate in the castle in Italy. Count Fernando Mazzini was his name. I never saw the beat of him for elegance. Papa objected, of course, and once we eloped, but Papa overtook us and took us back. I thought sure Papa and Fernando would fight a duel. Papa has a livery business in Poughkeepsie, you know. Finally, Papa came around and said we might be married next spring. Fernando showed him proofs of his title and wealth, and then went over to Italy to get the castle fixed up for the both of us. Papa's very proud, and when Fernando wanted to give me several $1,000s for my trousseau, he called him down something awful. He wouldn't even let me take a ring or any presents from him. And when Fernando sailed, I came to the city and got a position as a cashier at a candy store. 3 days ago, I got a letter from Italy, forwarded from Poughkeepsie, saying that Fernando had been killed in a gondola accident. That is why I'm in mourning. My heart, Mr. Donovan, will remain forever in the grave. I guess I am poor company, Mr. Donovan, but I cannot take any interest in no one. I should not care to keep you from gaiety and your friends who can smile and entertain you. Perhaps you would prefer to walk back to the house. Now, girls, if you want to observe a young man hustle after a pick and shovel, just tell him that your heart is in some other fellow's grave. Young men are grave robbers, and it comes by them naturally. Ask any widow. Something must be done to restore that missing organ to weeping angels in crepe de chine. Dead men certainly get the worst of it from all sides. I'm awful sorry, said Mr. Donovan gently. No, we won't walk back to the house just yet. And don't say you haven't no friends in the city, Miss Conway. I am awful sorry, and I want you to believe I'm your friend, and that I'm awful sorry. I got this picture here in my locket, said Miss Conway after wiping eyes with her handkerchief. I never showed it to anybody, but I will to you, Mr. Donovan, because I believe you to be a true friend. Mr. Donovan gazed long and with much interest at the photograph in the locket that Miss Conway opened for him. The face of Count Mazzini was one to command interest. It was a smooth, intelligent, bright, almost a handsome face. The face of a strong, cheerful man who might well be a leader among his fellows. I have a larger one framed in my room, said Miss Conway. When we return, I will show it to you. They are all I have to remind me of my Fernando. But he will be ever present in my heart. That's a sure thing. A subtle task confronted Mr. Donovan, that of supplanting the unfortunate Count in the heart of Miss Conway. This his admiration for her determined him to do. But the magnitude of the undertaking did not seem to weigh upon his spirits. The sympathetic but cheerful friend was the role he essayed, and he played it so successfully that the next half hour found them conversing pensively across 2 plates of ice cream, though yet there was no diminution of the sadness in Miss Conway's large gray eyes. Before they parted in the hall that evening, she ran upstairs and brought down the framed photograph wrapped lovingly in a wife's scarf. Mr. Donovan surveyed her with inscrutable eyes. He gave me this as the night he left for Italy, said Miss Conway. I had one for the locket made from this as well. A fine-looking man, said Mr. Donovan heartily. How would it suit you, Miss Conway, to give me the pleasure of your company to Coney Island next Sunday? A month later, they announced they were engaged. to Miss Scott and the rest of the boarders at the house. Miss Conway continued to wear black. A week after the announcement, the two sat on the same bench in the downtown park while the fluttering leaves of the trees made a dim kinetoscope picture of them in the moonlight. But Donovan had worn a look of abstracted gloom all day. He was so silent tonight that Love's lips could not keep back any longer the question that Love's heart propounded. "What's the matter, Andy? You are so solemn and grouchy tonight." "Nothing, Maggie." "I know better. I can tell. You never acted this way before. What is it?" "It's nothing much, Maggie." "Yes, it is, and I want to know. I'll bet it's some other girl you're thinking about, all right. Why don't you go get her if you want her? Take your arm away, if you please." "I'll tell you then," said Andy wisely, "but I guess you won't understand it exactly. You heard of Mike Sullivan? Haven't you? Big Mike Sullivan, everybody calls him." "No, I haven't. No, I haven't," said Maggie. "And I don't want to if he makes you act like this. Who is he?" "He's the biggest man in New York," said Andy almost reverently. "He can do about anything he wants to with Tammany or any old thing in the political line. He's a mile high and as broad as the East River. You say anything against Big Mike, and you'll have 1,000,000 men on your collarbone in about 2 seconds. Why, he made a visit over to the old country a while back, and the Kings took to the holes like rabbits. Well, Big Mike's a friend of mine. I ain't more than deuce high in the district as far as influence goes, but Mike's as good a friend to a little man or a poor man as he is to a big one. I met him today on the Bowery, and what do you think he does? Comes up and shakes my hand. "Andy," says he, "I've been keeping cases on you. You've been putting in some good licks on your side of the street, and I'm proud of you. What do you have to drink?" He takes a cigar, and I take highball. I told him I was going to get married in 2 weeks. "Andy," says he, "send me an invitation so I'll keep in mind of it, and I'll come to the wedding." That's what Big Mike says to me, and he always does what he says. You don't understand it, Maggie, but I'd have one of my hands cut off to have Big Mike Sullivan at our wedding. Excuse me. It would be the proudest day of my life. When he goes to a man's wedding, there's a guy being married that's made for life. Now that's why I'm maybe looking sore tonight. "Well, why don't you invite him then, if he's so much to the mustard?" said Maggie lightly. "There's a reason why I can't," said Andy sadly. "There's a reason why he mustn't be there. Don't ask me what it is, for I can't tell you." "Oh, I don't care," said Maggie. "It's something about politics, of course, but it's no reason why you can't smile at me." "Maggie," said Andy presently, "do you think as much of me as you did of the Count Mazzini?" He waited a long time, but Maggie did not reply. And then, suddenly, she leaned against his shoulder and began to cry and shake with sobs, holding his arm tightly and wetting the crepe de chine with tears. There, soothed Andy, putting aside his own trouble. "And what is it now?" "Andy," sobbed Maggie, "I've lied to you, and you'll never marry me or love me anymore. But I feel that I've got to tell. Andy, there never was so much as a little finger of a count. I never had a beau in my life, but all the other girls had. And they talked about him, and that seemed to make the guys like them more. And Andy, I look swell in black. You know I do. So I went out to the photograph shop and bought that picture and had a little one made for my locket and made up all that story about the Count and about his being killed so I could wear black. And nobody can love a liar. And you'll shake take me, Andy, and I'll die for shame. Oh, there never was anybody I liked but you. That's all there is. But instead of being pushed away, she found Andy's arm, folding her closer. She looked up and saw his face, clear and smiling. Could you forgive me, Andy? Sure, said Andy. It's all right about that. Back to the cemetery for the count. You straightened everything out, Maggie. I was in hopes you would before the wedding days. Bully girl. Andy, said Maggie, with a somewhat shy smile after she had been thoroughly assured of forgiveness. Did you believe all that story I made up about the count? Well, not to any large extent, said Andy, reaching for his cigar case, because it's Big Mike Sullivan's picture you've got in that locker. And that's the end, Mr. Toastmaster.
Jim, you make us laugh and have some fun. Really enjoyed that. Now comes our opportunity to have table topics and respond spontaneously rather than Jim reading to us or acting out his reading. And Olga is